Topic is the Declaration of Independence at the 21st century, and we're talking to Dr. Bobby Lovett from the Tennessee State University History Department in reference to that. And of course, Dr. Lovett, before we had our first commercial break, we promised that we'd give you an opportunity to talk about African Americans and the Declaration of Independence. I think you've given us some information relative to slavery during that period, but let's allow you to pick up there and to give our audience over the next 8 minutes the information that you think that they ought to have in reference to appreciate what this document was all about and the impact that it had upon African Americans.
Well, I said that, there was a contradiction in the way that the Founding Fathers acted and what the Declaration of Independence said. Northern colonies did try to correct that by passing gradual abolition acts that eventually got rid of slavery in the northern colonies by 1820, some 30 or 40 years after the American Revolution. Remember that African Americans had fought on both sides. They fought in the Continental Army under George Washington, although he reluctantly allowed them to because he was a slave owner. And of course, fighting in the army would, entice slaves to run away from the plantations. In fact, George Washington lost 90% of his slaves during the Revolutionary War. But a great number of African Americans fought on the British side, because Lord Dunmore, the governor of Virginia, proclaimed that any person, regardless of color, who would join Her Majesty's forces against the rebellion would be declared free. Now remember, at that day and time that about 70% of all Americans were enslaved, not just African Americans or Americans from Africa, but 3/4 of all of the colonists that came from Europe, they came in bondage. They were either redemptioners under redemption contracts. They either came as a convict labor contract, and they came as indentured servants. So what Lord Dunmore was appealing to was these persons, not just black persons, but white persons as well, who were enslaved. 3/4 of Americans came to the 13 colonies in some form of bondage or another, whether they were black or white. And keep in mind that color was not significant then as it is today. And racial division was not as significant as it is today in 2001 and 1780. So African Americans believe they too deserve freedom. So when the British lost in 1783 with that treaty I mentioned that ended the war officially, thousands of African Americans left with the British forces on their transports. Some of them went and settled in Nova Scotia, that part of northeastern Canada today, and a great number of them went to London and Britain itself. Others were resettled in what we call Sierra Leone by the British in 1787, about 4 years after the treaty was approved. So African Americans believe that they too, had won the war. They had fought for freedom. Those who remained behind that did not leave with the British, which were most African Americans. And so they were celebrators of July 4th celebrations more than anybody else. In fact, in the South, African Americans celebrated July 4th more than white Americans did in the South after the Civil War, because many Southerners shunned the July 4th celebration because of the war and the Confederacy. And so it was a long time before you really had a lot of white Southerners celebrating the July 4th celebration again, really until the 20th century. For a long time after the war, for 35, 40 years, they shunned it. And it would be African Americans who would have July 4th parades and picnics. And they would use these parades and picnics as civil rights movements. They would have signs saying that we are free too and all those kinds of things. So African Americans really in the South have been more loyal to the July 4th celebration than have other Southerners. In fact, we use July 4th as family reunion time. And we also use the other Emancipation Day when the British emancipated all the slaves in the British Empire in 1834, August of 1833-34. Many African American celebrations for family reunions, you notice, are in August. So we do our family reunions around July 4th and also around August 8th. because August 8, 1833 was the first emancipation, when the British emancipated all the slaves down in the islands and the other British Empire.
You know, Dr. Lovett, often we hear of the word Juneteenth, June 19th.
Right.
And let's have you explain exactly what that was all about, because that's one of the dates that we hear often about this time of year. What does that mean, Juneteenth?
In fact, in the paper, Juneteenth celebration is coming up, or is already come up in Hatley Park in North Nashville, a couple of celebrations. But Juneteenth was June 19th, 1865, was the date that the Union Army notified slaves in Texas that the war was over and that they were free. Texas was a huge place, as you know, and most of slavery existed in the eastern part of Texas and some of it around the Gulf. But when the British, when the Union Army arrived in 1865 in Galveston, they, sent out the word that, slavery was over. So because Texas was not involved in the Civil War, that is, battles took place, things went on in Texas just like nothing had happened during the Civil War. So slaves were not told by their masters or anybody that Lincoln has passed the Emancipation Proclamation, January 1st, 1863. It wasn't until June 19th that they found out, and so they celebrate June 19th. June 19th, or Juneteenth as they call it, is really a celebration for Texas slaves, although African Americans in other places find it convenient to celebrate Juneteenth, but it really is not an official date for us in Tennessee. We really did not get freed in Tennessee until March of 1865, because Tennessee was not under the Emancipation Proclamation, although the governor of the state, Andrew Johnson, did declare in October of 1864 that all slaves were free in Tennessee. So Juneteenth is symbolic for African Americans, but historically it really doesn't mean anything for us in Tennessee.
And of course, during the last 30 seconds that we have here, the big thing that freed all of the slaves was the 13th Amendment. Say something about that.
Well, the 13th Amendment was finally passed on December the 18th, 1865. Remember I said the legislature of Tennessee passed the bill in March of 1865. Several months later, the number of states required to ratify the 13th Amendment, December 18th, ratified it, and that got rid of slavery north and south.
Very good. And of course, Dr. Lovett, we're coming to the end of the second segment, after which we'll come back and give you an opportunity to talk about where the Declaration of Independence stands in the 21st century. And of course, we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. The topic is the Declaration of